On the harsh and unforgiving planet of Varnix, survival was not just a matter of luck. It was a test of strength. The Arathians, a proud warrior race with shimmering silver skin and eyes like molten gold, valued power above all else. To be weak in their society was to be invisible, forgotten, or worse, cast aside as if you never existed. For Kayla, this truth was etched into her life from the moment she took her first breath. Born frail and sickly, Kayla had always been an outsider among her people. Her limbs were thinner than those of other Arathian children, her reflexes slower, and her endurance pitiful by their standards. While others trained with energy blades and practiced combat maneuvers under the twin suns of Varnix, Kayla struggled to keep up. Every failure brought jeers from her peers and cold indifference from her father, the chieftain. He refused to even look at her during gatherings, treating her as though she were nothing more than a shadow haunting the edges of his perfect clan. The day that changed everything began like any other. It was the annual sparring ceremony, a brutal tradition where young Arathians proved their worth through combat. Kayla stood nervously in line with the other trainees, her heart pounding as she watched them step forward one by one to face their opponents. Each match ended with cheers for the victor and disdain for the loser. But no one paid much attention to Kayla when it was finally her turn. She stepped into the arena, gripping the hilt of her blade so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her opponent was Torin, a boy who had tormented her since childhood. His sneer widened as he circled her, taunting her with words meant to break what little confidence she had left. "You're wasting everyone's time," he spat. "Why don't you just give up now?" Kayla didn't respond. Instead, she focused on steadying her breathing, trying to remember the few techniques she practiced in secret. But as soon as the fight began, it became clear how mismatched they were. Torin moved with speed and precision, striking again and again until Kayla's blade clattered to the ground. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she collapsed onto the dusty earth, her body trembling as the crowd erupted into laughter. Humiliated and broken, Kayla lay there, staring up at the blazing sky. Tears stung her eyes, but before she could pull herself together, a deafening roar split the air. Everyone froze as a streak of fire tore across the horizon, a human ship spiraling out of control before crashing into the nearby forest. Smoke billowed into the sky, and chaos broke out among the Arathians. Humans were rare visitors to Varnix, and their arrival was seen as both a threat and a curiosity. As the clan rushed toward the crash site, Kayla remained behind, watching silently. Something about the sight stirred something deep within her, a flicker of hope, perhaps, or maybe just a desperate need to believe that things could change. Little did she know, this strange twist of fate would alter the course of her life forever. The aftermath of the battle was bittersweet. The Zorith invasion had been repelled, their forces scattered, and their mothership reduced to ashes in the sky. But the cost of victory weighed heavily on Kayla's heart. As she stood amidst the wreckage, her crystalline armor dulled with soot and blood, she couldn't shake the image of Elias giving his life to ensure the survival of her people. His final words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, protect your people. Asterisk. For the first time in her life, Kayla felt truly seen, not as a weakling or an outcast, but as someone capable of making a difference. The Arathians gathered around her now, their expressions no longer filled with disdain but with respect. Even Torek, her father, approached her cautiously, his golden eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and regret. "You saved us," he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "I misjudged you, Kayla. I thought strength could only come from brute force, but you've shown me otherwise." Kayla met his gaze steadily, though her voice trembled slightly. Strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. That's what Elias taught me. Torek nodded, his expression softening. "You are my daughter, and I am proud of you. From this day forward, you will have a place among us, a leader who embodies both courage and wisdom." Though the weight of her father's acknowledgement brought some comfort, Kayla knew that true healing would take time. She walked through the battlefield, helping tend to the wounded and honoring those who had fallen. Among them was Torin, who had fought valiantly alongside her during the final assault. Though injured, he survived and approached her later, his usual arrogance replaced by humility. "I never should have doubted you," he admitted, wincing as he adjusted his bandaged arm. "You proved everyone wrong, including me." Kayla smiled faintly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." In the days that followed, Kayla dedicated herself to rebuilding not just her clan, but their way of thinking. She shared stories of Elias and humanity's resilience, teaching her people that strength wasn't limited to physical prowess. Under her guidance, the Arathians began embracing new strategies and technologies, blending tradition with innovation. Slowly but surely, their culture transformed, becoming more inclusive and adaptable. But Kayla didn't stop there. Remembering how she had once been cast aside, she made it her mission to mentor others who were deemed weak by society, those overlooked or dismissed because they didn't fit the mold. She showed them that true strength came from determination, creativity, and unity. Her efforts inspired a generation of Arathians to redefine what it meant to be a warrior. At night, Kayla often visited the ruins where everything had changed, the place where she had discovered the crystalline armor and found her purpose. Standing beneath the twin moons of Varnix, she gazed at the stars, remembering Elias. His sacrifice had given her the chance to become something greater than herself, and she vowed never to forget him. One evening, as she traced the glowing patterns on her armor, Kayla whispered a silent promise to the heavens. "Thank you, Elias. Because of you, I found my strength, and I'll use it to protect everyone who needs it." The crystalline surface shimmered in response, almost as if acknowledging her words. In that moment, Kayla realized she wasn't alone. The spirit of the ancient civilization that had created the relics lived on through her, just as Elias's legacy would continue to guide her path. As dawn broke over Varnix, painting the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, Kayla stepped forward with renewed resolve. She was no longer the girl who had been cast aside. She was a warrior, a beacon of hope for her people, and a symbol of change. And though challenges still lay ahead, she faced them unafraid, ready to fight for justice, unity, and peace. Her journey had only just begun. The ancient ruins became Kayla's sanctuary, a place where she could shed the weight of her past and forge a new identity. The crystalline armor fit her perfectly, as though it had been crafted just for her. Its surface shimmered with an ethereal glow, pulsating faintly in rhythm with her heartbeat. When she wore it, she felt stronger, not just physically, but mentally. It was as if the armor amplified her resolve, giving her the confidence to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Elias wasted no time in putting her through rigorous training. He pushed her harder than ever before, teaching her how to harness the full potential of the relics they'd discovered. The armor wasn't just protective, it enhanced her speed, agility, and reflexes, making her movements fluid and precise. Combined with the energy blade she now wielded, Kayla began to resemble the warrior she had always dreamed of becoming. But mastering the relics came at a cost. As Kayla trained, she started experiencing vivid visions, flashes of the ancient civilization that had once thrived on Varnix. She saw towering cities bathed in blue light, bustling with life. She witnessed their downfall too. Skies darkened by warships, screams echoing through crumbling streets, and finally, the eerie silence of extinction. Each vision left her shaken, yet determined to uncover the truth behind the ruins. "What do you think happened to them?" Kayla asked Elias one evening as they rested near a flickering fire. The jungle around them was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, but her thoughts remained consumed by the mysterious civilization. "I don't know," Elias admitted, his expression thoughtful. "But I think these relics hold more power than we realize." "Be careful, Kayla. Power like this can be dangerous if misused." Kayla nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that the visions were trying to warn her about something. Despite the unease, she pressed on, driven by a growing sense of purpose. For the first time in her life, She felt like she belonged somewhere, even if it was among the echoes of a long-lost people. As weeks passed, Kayla's transformation became undeniable. Her movements were sharp and calculated, her strikes swift and precise. Under Elias's guidance, she learned to blend stealth with combat, using the terrain to her advantage. He taught her to anticipate her opponent's actions, to think several steps ahead, and to adapt when things didn't go according to plan. Every lesson brought her closer to becoming the warrior she was meant to be. Yet, amidst the triumphs, there were moments of doubt. One night, after a particularly grueling session, Kayla collapsed onto the ground, exhausted. "What if I fail?" she whispered, staring up at the stars. "What if all this isn't enough?" Elias sat beside her, his voice calm but firm. "Failure isn't the end, Kayla. It's part of the journey. You've already come so far, from being cast aside to standing here, ready to fight for what you believe in. That's strength, real strength." His words reignited the fire within her. She realized that the true test wouldn't be proving herself to her clan, or even defeating her enemies. It would be overcoming her own fears and insecurities. With each passing day, she grew more confident, more capable. And slowly, she began to see herself not as the weak girl who had been banished, but as a warrior forged in adversity. Their peace was shattered one morning when a distant rumble shook the jungle. At first, Kayla thought it was thunder, but then the ground trembled violently, sending birds scattering into the sky. Elias grabbed his scanner and frowned. "It's not natural," he said grimly. "Something big is coming." Peering through the trees, they saw plumes of smoke rising from the horizon. Moments later, a scout drone zipped overhead, its metallic body gleaming under the sun. It was marked with the insignia of the Zoreth, a ruthless alien empire known for conquering planets and enslaving their populations. "The invasion has begun," Elias muttered, his jaw tightening. They must have detected the energy signatures from the ruins. Kayla clenched her fists, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. The Arathians would need every ounce of strength to survive the onslaught, but they were blinded by pride and tradition. They wouldn't listen to her, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she could prove herself in battle and show them that true strength wasn't about dominance. It was about unity, strategy, and heart. With Elias by her side, Kayla prepared to face the greatest challenge of her life. The Zoreth were coming, and the fate of Varnix hung in the balance. The Zoreth invasion spread across Varnix like wildfire, their massive warships blotting out the twin suns and casting long shadows over the land. From their hovering fortresses, swarms of drones descended, followed by heavily armored ground troops armed with plasma rifles and energy shields. The Arathians, despite their pride and combat prowess, were caught off guard. Their brute force tactics proved ineffective against the Zoreth's superior technology and disciplined formations. Kayla and Elias watched the chaos unfold from a hilltop overlooking the battlefield. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning vegetation. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the cries of wounded Arathians filled the air. Kayla's heart ached as she saw her people, her clan, struggling to hold their ground. Even Torin, who had once mocked her so cruelly, fought valiantly, but was quickly overwhelmed by the relentless assault. "We can't just stand here," Kayla said, gripping her energy blade tightly. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from determination. "They're losing. If we don't do something, they'll all die." Elias nodded, his expression grim. "You're right. But this isn't just about saving them. It's about proving yourself. Are you ready?" Kayla took a deep breath, steeling herself. She thought back to everything Elias had taught her: stealth, strategy, adaptability. This was her chance to show the Arathians and herself that she wasn't weak, that she could be a warrior. "I'm ready," she said firmly. Descending into the fray, Kayla moved like a shadow, her crystalline armor blending seamlessly with the flickering light of explosions. Using the jungle terrain to her advantage, She struck swiftly and decisively, targeting isolated Zoreth units. Her energy blade cut through their defenses with ease, while her enhanced speed allowed her to evade counterattacks. Each strike was precise, each movement calculated. At first, the Arathians didn't notice her presence. They were too focused on surviving the onslaught. But as Kayla dismantled one Zoreth squad after another, whispers began to spread. Who was this mysterious figure clad in shimmering crystal? Some thought it was a spirit of Varnix come to aid them. Others believed it was a trick of the enemy. It wasn't until Kayla saved Torin from certain death that her identity became clear. Torin had been cornered by 3 Zoreth soldiers, his energy shield depleted and his weapon broken. Just as he braced for the killing blow, Kayla appeared seemingly out of nowhere, her blade slicing through the attackers in a blur of motion. When the dust settled, Torin stared at her in disbelief. "Kayla," he gasped, his voice trembling. How are you doing this?" Kayla didn't respond. Instead, she extended a hand to help him up. For a moment, pride warred with gratitude in Torin's eyes, but survival won out. He accepted her help, nodding silently before rejoining the fight. Word of Kayla's heroics reached Torek, her father, during a desperate retreat. The chieftain stood atop a rocky ridge, watching as his warriors fell back under the Zoreth's relentless advance. His face was etched with despair, something no one had seen before. When Kayla approached him, still clad in her glowing armor, he looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. "You've returned," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Why?" "Because I'm still your daughter," Kayla replied, her tone steady. "And because Varnix is my home too. Let me help. Together, we can turn the tide." Torek hesitated, torn between his ingrained distrust of weakness and the undeniable proof of Kayla's strength standing before him. Finally, he nodded. "Do what you must. Lead whoever will follow you." With her father's reluctant blessing, Kayla gathered a small group of outcasts, those who had been overlooked or dismissed by the clan, much like she had been. Among them was Torin, who now regarded her with newfound respect. Together, they formed an unlikely strike team, using guerrilla tactics to disrupt the Zoreth's operations. Under Kayla's leadership, the team sabotaged supply lines, ambushed patrols, and lured larger Zoreth forces into traps. Their unconventional methods sowed confusion among the invaders, buying precious time for the Arathians to regroup. Slowly but surely, the tide began to shift. But the battle was far from over. Deep within the heart of the Zoreth fleet loomed their commander, a towering behemoth encased in blackened armor, wielding weapons capable of leveling entire villages. To win the war, Kayla knew she would have to confront him directly. And when that moment came, she vowed to face him not as the girl who had been cast aside, but as the warrior she had become. Kayla's secret meetings with Elias became a lifeline, a beacon of hope in her otherwise bleak existence. Each night, under the cover of darkness, she would sneak out to meet him, bringing scraps of food and fragments of curiosity. In return, Elias shared more than just stories. He began teaching her things that no Arathian warrior had ever considered valuable: strategy, adaptability, and the power of the mind. "You don't need brute force to win," Elias told her one evening as they sat beneath the twin moons of Varnix. "Strength isn't always about muscles or weapons. Sometimes it's about knowing how to use what you've got." Kayla listened intently, her wide eyes reflecting the light of the moons. She had grown up believing that strength was measured by physical prowess, but Elias's words planted seeds of doubt in her mind. What if there was another way? A way for someone like her, a girl deemed too weak to matter, to prove her worth. Elias started training her in unconventional ways. He taught her how to move quietly through the dense jungle surrounding the village, using shadows and natural cover to remain unseen. He showed her how to track animals by reading subtle signs in the environment: broken twigs, disturbed leaves, faint footprints in the dirt. For the first time, Kayla felt a sense of accomplishment. These skills didn't require raw power. They relied on observation, patience, and focus. and for once she excelled. One night, Elias handed her a small device he'd salvaged from his crashed ship. It was a compact scanner capable of detecting energy signatures. "This will help you see things others can't," he explained. "Knowledge is one of the most powerful tools you can have." Kayla marveled at the gadget, turning it over in her hands. The idea of relying on technology instead of sheer force felt foreign yet exhilarating. Under Elias's guidance, she learned to use the scanner to map terrain and identify potential threats. Slowly, she began to understand that strength wasn't just about overpowering an opponent, it was about outsmarting them. Despite her growing confidence, fear lingered in the back of Kayla's mind. She knew she was risking everything by meeting Elias in secret. If her father or anyone else discovered her betrayal, the consequences would be severe. But every lesson she learned made her feel more alive, more capable. For the first time, she dared to imagine a future where she wasn't defined by her weaknesses. Tensions between the Arathians and Elias continued to simmer. Many in the clan demanded his immediate execution, viewing him as a threat to their traditions and way of life. Torak, Kayla's father, remained undecided, torn between his distrust of humans and his curiosity about the strange devices Elias possessed. Meanwhile, Torin kept a close eye on Kayla, waiting for the perfect moment to expose her treachery. One evening, as Kayla returned from another secret meeting, she noticed Torin lurking near the edge of the forest. His sharp gaze followed her every move, and a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. She quickened her pace, trying to appear calm, but she could feel this suspicion pressing down on her like a storm cloud ready to burst. The next morning, during a routine training session, Torin cornered her. "I know what you've been doing," he hissed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You've been sneaking off to see that human. If I tell your father, you'll never recover from the shame." Kayla froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She wanted to deny it, to lie her way out of trouble, but the look in Torin's eyes told her he wouldn't believe her. Instead, she clenched her fists and met his glare with quiet determination. "If you do," she said softly, surprising even herself with her boldness, "you'll regret it." Torin smirked, clearly amused by her defiance. "We'll see about that." As he walked away, Kayla realized she couldn't keep hiding. Her secret was fragile, hanging by a thread. But deep down, she also knew something else. She wasn't the same scared girl who had collapsed in the sparring arena weeks ago. With Elias's teachings and her newfound resolve, she was beginning to transform into something stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And that transformation might be the key to surviving whatever came next. The betrayal came sooner than Kayla expected. The very next day, Torin made good on his threat. During a clan meeting led by Torak, Kayla's father, Torin stepped forward with a smug grin plastered across his face. "Chieftain," he began, his voice loud enough to silence the murmurs of the gathered Arathians, "I have something important to report." All eyes turned to him, including Kayla's. Her stomach churned as she realized what was about to happen. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. "I've discovered that your daughter," Torin continued, pointing an accusing finger at Kayla, "has been sneaking out every night to meet with the human prisoner. She's been feeding him, talking to him, and learning his ways, all behind our backs." A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Gasps filled the air as the Arathians turned their attention to Kayla, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright disgust. Even Torak looked stunned, his golden eyes narrowing as they locked onto his daughter. "Is this true?" he demanded, his deep voice cutting through the commotion like a blade. Kayla hesitated, her mind racing for a way to defend herself. But before she could speak, Torin pressed on. "She's been corrupted by the human's weakness. Who knows what secrets she might have shared with him? She's a disgrace to our clan." Torak's face hardened into a mask of fury. For years, he had ignored Kayla, refusing to acknowledge her existence because of her perceived frailty. Now, faced with evidence of her disobedience, his shame turned into rage. "You dare bring dishonor upon us," he roared, stepping toward her. "After everything we've done for you." Kayla flinched under his glare, but then something inside her snapped. All her life, she had lived in fear of rejection, but now she stood accused for simply trying to find her own path. Summoning every ounce of courage, she raised her chin and met her father's gaze. "I didn't bring dishonor," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I sought strength, not the kind you value, but the kind that matters. The human taught me things you never could." Her words only fueled Torek's anger. "Enough," he bellowed. "You are no longer my daughter. You are banished from this clan. Leave now and never return." The decree hit Kayla like a physical blow. Banishment was one of the harshest punishments among the Arathians. It meant being cast out into the wilderness alone, left to fend for herself against predators and harsh conditions. Many who were banished didn't survive more than a few days. Yet, as much as it hurt, Kayla refused to let her father see her cry. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her head held high. As she ventured into the dense jungle surrounding the village, Elias awaited her near a hidden clearing. He had seen the commotion from afar and knew what had happened. When Kayla appeared, her face pale but resolute, he didn't offer empty words of comfort. Instead, he handed her a small energy blade scavenged from his ship. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. Together, they fled deeper into the wilderness, putting distance between themselves and the clan. Days turned into weeks as they survived off the land, relying on Elias's resourcefulness and Kayla's growing skills. One evening, while exploring a secluded valley, they stumbled upon something extraordinary: ancient ruins half buried beneath vines and moss. The structures pulsed faintly with a strange blue light, emanating from crystalline artifacts scattered throughout the site. This is incredible," Elias whispered, examining the relics. Among them was a suit of armor unlike anything they'd ever seen, crafted from shimmering crystal that seemed alive with energy. Kayla reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing its surface. A surge of warmth coursed through her body, and for the first time, she felt truly powerful. With the armor and weapons from the ruins, Kayla realized she had found more than just tools for survival. She had found a way to reclaim her dignity. And perhaps one day, she would use them to confront the people who had cast her aside. But first, she needed to master her newfound strength and prepare for the battles ahead. The final stand was inevitable. After days of relentless fighting, the Arathians had managed to slow the Zorath advance, thanks largely to Kayla's leadership and unorthodox tactics. But the invaders' numbers were still overwhelming, and their technology far surpassed anything the Arathians possessed. If they were to have any hope of victory, the tide needed to turn decisively, and soon. Kayla knew what she had to do. The towering figure of the Zorath commander loomed over the battlefield like a storm cloud, his massive frame encased in obsidian armor that seemed impervious to damage. He moved with terrifying precision, cutting down Arathian warriors as though they were nothing more than obstacles in his path. His weapon, a pulsating plasma cannon, fired beams of energy so powerful they left craters where once there had been solid ground. Every attempt to engage him ended in failure. No one could get close enough to land a blow. Standing on a ridge overlooking the carnage, Kayla tightened her grip on her energy blade. Her crystalline armor shimmered faintly, its glow steady and reassuring. Beside her, Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is it," he said softly. "You've trained for this moment. Trust yourself." Kayla nodded, though her stomach churned with nerves. She glanced back at the Arathians below. Her people, battered but not broken. Among them stood Torin, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Even Torek, her father, watched silently from a distance, his expression unreadable. For the first time, Kayla felt the weight of their expectations, not as a burden, but as fuel for her determination. Descending into the fray, Kayla relied on every lesson Elias had taught her. She darted through the chaos, using the jungle's dense foliage and uneven terrain to stay hidden. When she finally reached the outskirts of the Zorath commander's position, she paused, studying him carefully. He was surrounded by a squadron of elite guards, their weapons trained on anyone foolish enough to approach. Kayla didn't charge blindly. Instead, she waited for the perfect moment, timing her movements to coincide with a barrage of explosions caused by Arathian counterattacks elsewhere on the battlefield. The distraction worked. The guards turned their attention toward the noise, giving Kayla just enough time to slip past their defenses. When the Zorath commander noticed her presence, his glowing red eyes narrowed in disdain. "Another pest," he growled, raising his plasma cannon. A beam of energy shot toward her, but Kayla rolled out of the way with lightning speed, her armor amplifying her reflexes. She struck back immediately, her energy blade slicing through one of the commander's mechanical limbs. Sparks flew as the severed limb crashed to the ground, and for the first time, the Zorath giant faltered. Enraged, the commander abandoned his ranged weapon and lunged at her, swinging his massive fists. Each blow shook the earth, forcing Kayla to dodge and weave constantly. She couldn't match his raw power, but she didn't need to. Using the agility granted by her armor, she stayed just out of reach, striking quick, calculated hits whenever an opening appeared. As the battle raged, Elias fought nearby, leading a diversionary assault to keep the remaining Zorath forces occupied. Explosions lit up the sky as ships clashed overhead, and the air was thick with smoke and screams. Despite the chaos, Kayla remained focused, channeling all her strength and resolve into the fight. Finally, after what felt like hours, Kayla saw her chance. The commander staggered momentarily, his damaged systems causing delays in his movements. With a fierce cry, she leaped onto his back, driving her energy blade deep into a vulnerable joint in his armor. The blade crackled as it pierced through, and the commander let out a guttural roar before collapsing to his knees. Seconds later, his body went limp, crashing to the ground with a deafening thud. The battlefield fell silent as the surviving Arathians stared in awe. Their enemies began retreating, their morale shattered without their leader. Victory was within reach, but at a cost. Elias, gravely injured during the diversion, limped toward Kayla. Blood stained his flight suit, but he smiled weakly. "You did it," he rasped. "Now finish this." Summoning the last of his strength, Elias activated a device salvaged from his ship, a self-destruct mechanism rigged to destroy the Zorath mothership. As the countdown began, he urged Kayla to flee. She hesitated, tears streaming down her face, but Elias pushed her away. "Go, protect your people." With a heavy heart, Kayla ran, watching as the mothership erupted in flames. The explosion illuminated the night sky, signaling the end of the invasion, and the ultimate sacrifice of the man who had believed in her when no one else did. The crash site was a scene of chaos. The Arathians gathered around the smoldering wreckage, their weapons drawn and their expressions filled with suspicion. Smoke curled into the air like ghostly tendrils, and the acrid smell of burnt metal hung heavy in the atmosphere. For beings who prided themselves on strength and dominance, the sight of a human, a species they considered weak and inferior, was both baffling and infuriating. Captain Elias Drake stumbled out of the wreckage moments later, his face streaked with soot and blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. His once pristine flight suit was torn, and his movements were slow and labored, but there was something about him that commanded attention. Though injured, he stood tall, his piercing blue eyes scanning the crowd of towering aliens with defiance rather than fear. "Who are you?" demanded Torek, Kayla's father and chieftain of the clan. His voice boomed across the clearing, sharp enough to cut through steel. "Why have you come to our world?" Elias raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm, though his stance remained firm. "My name is Elias Drake," he said, his voice steady despite his injuries. "I'm a pilot from Earth. My ship malfunctioned during transit, and I had no choice but to land here." The Arathians exchanged wary glances. They didn't trust outsiders, especially humans, who were rumored to lack physical prowess and rely too heavily on machines. Torin, Kayla's childhood tormentor, stepped forward, sneering at the human. "You're pathetic," he spat. "Look at you, barely able to stand. You don't belong here." Kayla watched silently from the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding. She couldn't explain why, but she felt drawn to this stranger. There was something different about him, not just his appearance, but the way he carried himself. Despite being outnumbered and injured, Elias showed no signs of backing down. It was a kind of courage she'd never seen before. As night fell, the Arathians decided to keep Elias under guard while they debated what to do with him. Most wanted him executed immediately, viewing him as a threat to their way of life. But for now, he was left alone in a makeshift cell near the outskirts of the village. That evening, Kayla found herself unable to sleep. Her mind kept returning to the image of Elias standing defiant against her people. Driven by curiosity, and perhaps a longing for connection, she slipped away from her quarters and made her way to his holding area. She carried a small pouch of dried fruits and a flask of water, knowing he must be hungry and thirsty after his ordeal. When she approached, Elias looked up, surprised to see her. At first, he said nothing, studying her with cautious interest. Finally, he spoke. "You're not like the others, are you?" Kayla hesitated, unsure how to respond. She handed him the food and water, avoiding his gaze. I thought you might need these," she murmured softly. Elias accepted the offerings with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Then, after a pause, he added, "What's your name?" "Kayla," she replied, still hesitant. "I'm not important." Elias frowned, shaking his head. "Don't say that. Everyone has value, regardless of what others think." His words struck a chord deep within her, stirring emotions she'd buried long ago. Over the next few nights, Kayla continued visiting Elias in secret. Each time, he shared stories of humanity, their struggles, their triumphs, and their ability to adapt and overcome even the harshest challenges. He spoke of Earth's vast oceans, towering mountains, and sprawling cities, painting vivid pictures with his words. For the first time in her life, Kayla felt inspired. Here was someone who saw potential in her, someone who believed she could rise above the limitations others had placed upon her. But their meetings did not go unnoticed. One fateful night, as Kayla crept back to her quarters, she failed to see Torin lurking in the shadows, watching her every move. What he would do with this knowledge remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. Kayla's secret was about to change everything.